Welcome, welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of Music and Politics. Today we're back with Jack and on to gender, androgyny, and the AIDS crisis. Theatricality in modern pop music. Is it the result of deindustrialization or something deeper, something there all along? We'll discuss Foucault and Butler and listen to Little Richard, Erasure, The Smiths, and many others. Please stay tuned and don't forget to like and subscribe. Tutti Frutti, oh Rudy, 1956, going back, listening to Little Richard, yes? You can hear some of gospel, of course, early rock. Behind it all, yes, Little Richard, who, by the 1980s, right, had avowed his identity as a homosexual, and Fruity, yes, may indeed be, in retrospect. Now, moving about 10 years exactly after Little Richard, right, which underlies the fact that right from the very beginning, rooted in modern rock and pop, is some gender bending, if it's there, right, for others to see easier, yes, than some, want to move to another kind of subliminal or surreptitious message embedded in a pop song, and this is from the Beatles, 1965. Let's have a listen.
Hey, you've got to hide your love away. Hey, you've got to hide your love away.
This track from the Help album, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, widely interpreted as a kind of tribute to the Beatles' manager from John Lennon, Brian Epstein, yes, in a day when homosexuality was still criminalized until the year 1967 in England and Wales. It took until 1980 in Scotland, by the way. And Epstein, of course, was well known to all of his associates in the Beatles as a gay man. And in fact, his original aspiration was to be a dress designer, a notoriously heterosexual profession. And apparently Lennon and Epstein had some kind of romantic entanglement during a brief holiday to Spain. And buried within the message in the song, to be interpreted, if you so choose, is the hiding or the suppression or the repression of one's love here. And I also think it's kind of notable that there's a musical irony, if not almost a joke, by replacing normally what would have been a harmonica with a flute in the outro. The harmonica, right, evocative of a kind of rough and tumble, folksy, Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan moment, right, at the beginning of folk rock. And instead, the Beatles and their producer make the choice for a slightly more fruity sounding flute, shall we say, lovely as it is. Let's move on now, just a few years later, to the early 70s.
Every time you tried to read a book, you couldn't get to page 17. Plus you forgot who you were, so you couldn't even read. Don't you know they're gonna kill your sons?
autobiographical track from the great Lou Reed, founder of the Velvet Underground. This in 1974. Of course, after that group broke up, almost precisely 10 years after the Beatles track You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. That was Kill Your Sons by Lou Reed. Very autobiographical, very confessional. He essentially narrates blow by blow what happened when his parents decided to institutionalize him for suspected homosexuality. Yes, this was now Long Island of the 1950s. Yes, the family last name originally Rabinowitz had moved from Brooklyn like so many others at this time, and the suspicion itself creating a crisis. He speaks of how his father took an axe and broke the table in half, and at this time when Lou was hospitalized and institutionalized, he was subjected involuntarily to electroshock therapy, which of course scarred and traumatized him. And this, of course, shadowed him. And of course, at this moment, he is, along with Bowie, along with Iggy Pop, right, and Mark Bolan, a great voice of the glam rock movement, which brings in theatricality and gender bending and androgyny to a high point. Which even brings us to perhaps, I think, arguably the first time any rock star came out openly as gay, which Lou Reed's colleague and producer David Bowie said on the record, right, to the press in 1972. A milestone. And Bowie, of course, hard to imagine all of the rest of the groups we're going to discuss today with Jack without the influence of Bowie. The Smiths, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Erasure, yes, Bronski Beat. And Bowie at kind of a turning point where rock becomes much more than just about the music, but has a lot to do with theatricality, performance, which kind of confirms in a way Bowie as a somewhat ahead of his time, thinking and confirming one of the major theories about gender, not just that it's a construct according to Judith Butler and others, but specifically in her text Gender Trouble, says that it's the performance that actually constitutes. The illusory performance constitutes what gender is. It's not merely an expression, that performing androgyny and performing gender bending isn't itself simply an expression. It's not a mere means of reflecting something, but it actually constitutes what gender is itself. And with that, if we turn to a band whose name itself, right, couldn't be more a direct message about gender bending, and we're of course talking about Queen, over to Jack.
Hello, this is Jack. So yeah, at the time in the 80s, Queen was one of my favourite bands, along with I think U2 and Dire Straits. Queen was just like an everyday, hero. All of their songs, so many of them, and I think he was very flamboyant. And I'm not sure if in the early days we knew he was gay. In those days, and this is when I was quite young. Wearing leather trousers and leather caps and having moustaches was actually considered a sign of masculinity, but we didn't really know. As such, in those days, being gay was mostly hidden by people who were, and even jokingly, I've kind of said I grew up before it had really been invented. So we didn't really know, but then of course it became obvious. And with this track, I Want to Break Free. You can see he plays the part, like in the video, he's dressed as a woman, like a housewife, and he's playing the part of the bored housewife. And the song's ostensibly about how he'd like to break free of the household chores, and the other strictures. But it could well be about being able to break free and fully open and expressive about his sexuality. So let's have a listen to this.
I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from your lies. You're so satisfied me. I've got to break free.
Okay, so that's Freddie Mercury and Queen.
And just to break in 1 second, about exactly more true than maybe we even know or think, Jack, saying about you're born before the category exists, because according to another theoretical idea about how gender is formed by the French theorist Michel Foucault in his Discipline and Punish, claims that these categories are really matrices of knowledge power that were produced in the process of creating prisons, creating hospitals as a means of discipline. In other words, that people didn't even think in these categories, or they didn't even exist before the modern carceral state, and that it's in the act of disciplining which produces these categories of heterosexual, homosexual, etc. It's kind of akin a little bit when we talk about the AIDS crisis in the 80s, that arguably this, ravaging, this plague brought to the awareness these communities that it was through this kind of suffering and then, of course, repression and denial that made people more aware of it to begin with. But back to our next.
I'm not sure I go for that Foucault. It sounds like actually in England there were, even in the 60s, there were gangsters who were openly gay and everybody knew about it, but obviously you don't say anything to gangsters on the pain of death, probably. So also in the 80s came a new sound, very distinctive, also from my town. In fact, my mate Lee, his brother was offered to be the bass player for Frankie Goes to Hollywood, but he said no, because in his own words, they're all a bunch of pufters, and he didn't want to be associated with that. I mean, and so I remember going to Sefton Park, and everybody's wearing Relax t-shirts. Relax is the song we're going to listen to by Frankie, and it was banned because it was considered super explicit. But it was a really hot summer, and we all go to Sefton Park, and everyone's got Relax t-shirts on, and there's Les, the bass player, in his cool Ford Capri, and he must have been kicking himself. Like, he would have been rich and famous had he been able to put up with it. But let's listen to this amazing, really very distinctive sound. Obviously number one for a long time, despite it being banned. Here.
Relax, don't do it. When you wanna go to it. Relax, don't do it. When you wanna go. Relax, don't do it. When you wanna suck it to it. Relax, don't do it. When you wanna go. When you wanna go. Relax, don't do it. When you wanna go to it. Relax. Don't do it when you wanna go. Relax, don't do it when you wanna suck it to it. Relax, don't do it when you wanna go.
Okay, so it seems to be pretty obvious what he's talking about there, about not going quite up to the point of no return.
Right, noticeably, right, 84 from the album, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, right? And that kind of hedonism goes so much along as a soundtrack to deregulation, deindustrialization, the whole Thatcher neoliberal economic shift that happens in the West, right, before this period, in the late 70s. And part of it is, you see, with the kind of neoliberal model and with downsizing and deindustrialization, is that the concept of a family wage, where let's say one male can, even on a working class salary, afford the basics for a whole family, cars, college, etc., basically is in major decline. And you have also protracted unemployment there, and this kind of coincides. So just throwing out that, on the one hand, along with the AIDS crisis, you have a major shift economically that undermines, in many ways, the structure of the family in a modern industrial economy. So back to maybe more if we tackle the AIDS crisis, right, which is just coming, and it's in 1986 when, for instance, the first specialist AIDS hospital ward opens in England, ceremonially by none other than Princess Di herself, who's really way ahead in terms of looking this crisis directly in the face.
Well, actually, it was both of these, Freddie Mercury and Holly Johnson from Frankie Goes to Hollywood. They both died of AIDS, didn't they? Yeah. And actually, I went back to Liverpool, like quite a few years ago now, but still many years after I lived there first. And I met up with my first ever, real girlfriend, and another friend of ours who we used to hang around with at school. And we watched a video of the concert of Freddie Mercury singing Who Wants to Live Forever. And now the rumour has it he knew he had AIDS at this point and wasn't going to last long. And we all sat there crying our eyes out because he was so kind of beloved by everybody, basically, as absolutely super talented. So they both succumbed to it. But I'm going to come to another. These guys were big in the 80s, Erasure. And it's funny because after actually this must have been very late 80s or even early 90s, I met them in a pub in London. And I was good friends with the guy who owned the pub because he was actually after my girlfriend at the time. And they used to have lock-ins. And of course, you lock-in in a pub in London, it means you're in the in crowd. When the pub is legally supposed to shut, all the people on the in crowd go upstairs, nobody knows, and it's a lock-in. Nobody can come in off the street because the doors are locked. So because I was friendly with these guys, with the owner, Erasure came in and they're sitting at a table and they thought I worked there, and they said in a very camp voice, they said, can we come upstairs? And I said, yeah, all right, you can come, just don't sing. And he gave me such a horrible scowl and look, but of course it was all about the fun. Anyway, let's have a listen to that. This is A Little Respect. Again, it's one of these songs that's not overtly gay, but of course you can easily, without too much imagination, read into it that they're asking for a little respect and not taking the piss like I did.
I try to discover a little something to make me sweeter. Oh baby, refrain from breaking my heart. I'm so in love with you. I'll be forever blue. That you give me no reason why you make me work so hard. That you give me no, that you give me no, that you give me no, that you give me no soul. I hear you calling, oh baby. Give a little respect too.
Yeah, great example of, as you say, synth pop there. There's, by Erasure there. Another great track, classy track from the 80s, like there were so many.
Right, it's funny you mentioned camp, right? And we have to bring in Susan Sontag now, her notes on camp. Maybe the text, right, to which she owes her fame as a kind of public intellectual, non-academic, it should be said as well. And her definition of camp as related to artifice, the love of artifice, and exaggeration, right? Exaggerated theatrical gestures. And I think kind of synth pop, maybe part of the new romantics, is an extension of glam, of what was introduced, right, in that Bowie Reed generation at first. But let's go and continue on to our next. Yes.
Yeah, okay, so actually I want to follow up on that point about glam. Is obviously glam wasn't confined to the gay community. All of the 80s, there was even a movement called the New Romantics, and even people like Duran Duran, which weren't gay, and Human League. These guys, they were big into glam with their big hair, loads of hairspray, loads of makeup, and really quite effeminate in some ways. So it was a huge part of the look of the era. It was glam. And now we'll come to somebody who, actually I wouldn't say he was glam, he was more on the gothic side. And of course, well, in Liverpool we didn't really listen to the Smiths. I mean, this, like, musically fantastic. It's only been recently I've listened to a lot of his music, because like I say, we just didn't listen to him because of his style, and he was overtly gay, and but I'd say mostly his style, kind of gothic style. In Liverpool you don't have goths. I mean, we had some students, and I remember queuing up outside the cinema, and we were going to watch, I don't know, Beverly Hills Cop, or I don't know, one of the Star Wars. And these poor students, they're standing there in all their gothic gear, and there's lads from behind them in the queue just shouting, "Wanker, knobhead," and they're just throwing things at them, because, you know, it wasn't tolerated. You know, you either look like a scally and you're in, you know, with your Sergio Tacchini or Fila, you know, sports clothes, you know, or basic jeans, whatever. This kind of diversity didn't happen so much. But musically,
What's Scally?
brilliant. Oh, Scally. Scally is like somebody kind of from the streets who wears sports clothes, like maybe Chav is the modern equivalent, certainly in London. But anyway, let's have a listen to this. This is the Smiths, and it's a very, well, let's listen to it first, then we talk about it.
Girlfriend in a coma, I know, it's serious. Girlfriend in a coma, I know, it's really serious. There were times when I could have murdered her, but you know I would hate anything to happen to her. Now I don't want to see her. Do you really think she'll pull through? Do you really think she'll pull through? Girlfriend in a coma, I know.
Yeah, so that's...
I would never have guessed the AIDS connection with that.
Yeah,
Never thought of
well, I think it's down to about like coping with a partner who's gravely ill, and that kind of happened a lot at this time. But you can see this track. I mean, it's kind of jolly sounding. It's super catchy,
Yeah.
and yet the subject matter is well, it's not a happy one, but he's kind of making light of it. But then also, I just remembered another reason why, when we look at goths, and like this is the perspective as I see it from Liverpool, very working class town, is we look at middle-aged kids who are like making out that they've got it hard, and we thought, you don't have it hard. Like, we have it hard because we're so fucking poor.
But then it's funny that Morrissey, of course, I mean, he's kind of the outsider of the outsider. Originally at that time, he wasn't with any of those kinds of glam theatrical performance style we discussed before.
Yeah, right.
I know, even now it's funny, he's a major voice, you know, he's kind of an ultra vegan, he's a major voice against immigration, diversity is conformity
Wow,
for him.
yeah.
He's like, once again, an outsider of the outsider, too.
Yeah, and his the guitarist, was the guitarist Johnny Marr? It was known as to be one of the best ever. So I think like there's always this respect, and of course I remember moving down from Liverpool to Norwich, and where goths were accepted, and there were a lot more students, and of course you can't help but get up and dance like to some of the Smiths tracks, because they're just so good, and you can't really deny it. So last one, oh yeah, let's go another fantastically, I think, talented and extremely distinctive voice here. I think again from, if I'm not wrong, from Manchester, like the Smiths. That's probably another reason we hated them as well, because we're from Liverpool and they're from Manchester, you know, with the Smiths. But this guy, actually, you can listen and I'm sure you'll recognise it. Okay, so that's the unique sound of Jimmy Somerville, who actually maybe Scottish, but this song, like, fantastic song, and actually I don't think it's dated at all. It sounds like unlike the synth pop, which does sound a bit old. It's about small town boy, and you can hear him. He's basically saying he has to leave home, run away to because he won't find love at home, and basically, amongst all his friends and family, I'm imagining it's about coming out, or the difficulty of coming out into a local community, and it's probably best just to move away. Yeah.
Right, and he was spared the fate of Lou Reed, right, being forcibly institutionalized and then being plugged with electric shocks. But it brings us kind of full circle, I think, in a really nice way there. And it's something we might think about, that this kind of revolt, if you like, through music, right, empowerment through pop, essentially, was a major means. I mean, almost like conquering the mainstream. If you think of the 1980s, to what extent that almost gay expression took over pop, or at least captivated audiences worldwide, reflecting what the psychoanalyst Alfred Adler, when talking about organic, quote-unquote, inferiority, when people are labeled or made to feel lesser than, that they're inspired to revolt and to overcompensate in response.
Well, this seems to be kind of somewhat the case, that people from the gay community dominated. I mean, to some extent, but certainly up there. I mean, all of these ones we've looked at, they were huge parts, certainly of my childhood, and dominated the music scene in the back in the day. And of course, it influenced the wider scene of the glam rock. So now going back to glam, we've got somebody who I think may have been into the glam before it became popular. This guy, Pete Burns, he's from Liverpool, and of a Saturday I used to go to his record shop, the Probe in Liverpool, near Matthew Street, and just to have a look through. I think there were second-hand records, but anyway, loads of them. So he was a figure around town, and of course Liverpool in this way are also very tolerant of like other people, maybe not so the goths, but this guy was certainly out there and in your face, and I don't remember anybody giving him any shit. And this was his kind of his most popular hit.
And
So
who's this?
this is Dead or Alive. Pete Burns was the main guy. Yeah.
I get to know your name. To bright another day. Has in the sense of you. I've got to have my way now, baby. All I know is that's me. You look like you're having fun. On my neck, you're laughing off. Watch out, sweet right now. You spin me right round, baby, right round. Like a record, baby, right round, round, round. You spin me right round, baby, right round. Like a record, baby, right round, round, round.
One last track for all of you dear listeners, and we thank you so much for being with us today. And I think one that ties it all up in a way, Culture Club's Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? Prophetic, perhaps beyond even its original intentions, that in the late 80s, just as the AIDS pandemic was reaching its dreaded heights, governments, and if we take the UK, were passing ordinances to forbid any kind of teaching of homosexuality right then. But of course, after that major wave subsided, Boy George was one of the first of a long line of others, like George Michael and Elton John, that finally came out, right, and owned their identity and took it back So there's some kind of silver lining at the end of it, or the sacrifices were not all in vain of the 40 million global casualties of the AIDS epidemic. So Culture Club, do you really want to hurt me? And we don't want to hurt you, our dear listeners. Thank you for being with us.
Please remember to rate and review and to like and subscribe to Music and Politics. Please send any questions to musicandpoliticspod, that's all one word, at gmail.com. musicandpoliticspod@gmail.com, and do seek us out on Patreon at Music and Politics Pod, again one word, where you can find membership that opens the door to curated reading and listening lists, as well as meetings and consultations with our team.